slightly different. You probably already know that in order to win the game of money, you have to understand its rules first. That's why we have so many videos explaining different rules of money. But for this video, we have chosen the most important rules of money and turned them into one single video. It's like a crash course on money management. If you want to master the game of money, then this video is going to teach you everything you need to know about money. There is going to be a table of content in the description, so you can skip to the parts that you want to learn or come back and rewatch them again. This is going to be a really long video. So if you're ready, grab a drink and some snacks and enjoy the video. Who is the fastest self-made billionaire ever? While it took Warren Buffett 55 years to join the Billionaires Club, Jay Walker literally did it in less than a year. He launched Priceline.com during the dot-com bubble and his net worth instantly jumped from zero to billions. But that wasn't sustainable because when the bubble burst, his net worth crashed as well, while Buffett is still on the top of the list, and he doesn't seem to go anywhere anytime soon. And that's the kind of wealth you want to build. The game of money isn't easy, it's tough, competitive and ruthless, and if you don't know the rules, you are doomed to fail. The problem with most people is that they might work hard their entire lives, but end up poor at the end of the journey because they don't know how the game works. So if you want to find yourself on the other side of the coin, you better master the rules first. Number 1. Money does grow on trees. I am sure that many of you have been taught the opposite, but the reality is that if you do not operate from this perspective, you will be poor forever. You can't trade your time for money your entire life. That's why you need to plant trees that will earn you money when you are not there. It's not as easy as it sounds. Do you know how difficult it is to plant a tree? First, you need to plant the seed, but the seed is useless if it's not planted in a nutrient-rich soil. The tree isn't going to grow by itself. You need to water it and take care of it, and it's definitely not going to grow overnight. Some trees literally grow for 10, 20 or even 30 years. But once it grows up, it will keep producing fruits with minimum effort. The same goes to assets. Once you build up a business or save up enough to make a good investment, it keeps generating income, even if you're not there. Because at some point you might get old or sick, you won't be able to sustain your job. So even if you're making like $500 an hour, you could get back poor instantly if you haven't planted enough trees in your garden. Next, there is no limit to how much you can spend. I remember when I was living paycheck to paycheck, I was on an extremely tight budget. I used to think that if I would be making even slightly more than I do now, I will start investing. But what ended up happening is that I just started spending more. In fact, when I started making multiple times more, all that happened is my expenses just kept getting higher and higher. If you do not budget and discipline yourself to stick to a certain budget, you won't be able to save money to invest even if you make like 100 grand a month. There are infinite ways you can spend that 100 grand. So instead of constantly pushing that investing line higher and higher, discipline yourself to stick to a smaller budget. If Elon Musk could survive on $1 a day in United States, you will definitely survive with a few $100. Don't get me wrong, enjoy the money you earn with your hard work, travel or do whatever you desire, but stick to a budget that's lower than your income because you have to acquire assets. Number 3. Money is a lifelong game. When I got serious about money and investing, I've had this image in my mind that when I start making so and so, I won't need to stick to a specific budget and I will finally retire and enjoy the fruits of my hard work. But all what happened when I started making that much is that I realized that's not enough and I have to make much more. In fact, even all the passive income sources that I have built weren't as passive as I thought. They needed to be managed. In fact, if you stop managing them, they will stop generating income. Just because you purchased a house, you instantly won't find tenants. If you don't take care of it, it might even turn into a liability. The idea where you create an asset and literally do nothing is just nonsense. Even if you build a successful business, you will have competitors who will try to take you down every single day. So forget the idea of retiring one day. Of course, you can automate some of your duties, decrease your working hours, but in general, this game never ends as long as you're alive. And a clear example is world's richest people who continue to work even if they don't have to. The next rule is probably the most important lesson in this video. Money won't solve your insecurities. We all have insecurities, and a lot of times we buy that expensive car or move to a bigger house or buy a newer phone because we want to be accepted or admired. That expensive car will make you feel good for a week or two, but then it will become normal. But your insecurity won't go away. So you would want a better and more expensive car. It's a never-ending cycle that keeps people who make a lot of money poor. If it's acceptance you're seeking, then learn how to better manage your emotions. The truth is that your insecurities will drain down your bank account but will still stay there. Instead, improve your social skills, learn how to boost your confidence. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy an expensive car or a private jet. Go ahead and buy whatever you desire, but don't do it to fill your insecurities. There are far better and cheaper ways to do that. Number 5. Don't let anyone know that you have money. We love to brag about how much money we make. At the end of the day, in the age of capitalism, that's what defines your social status. At least that's how most people think. But the problem is that money is like a magnet. Suddenly people will be nice to you because everyone wants a piece of it. Of course, it will make you feel good and respected, but that comes at a price that's not really worth it. And if they won't be able to get it in a nice way, they will sue you and get it hard way. That's the reality we live in. Even if you, God forbid, make $1 million a year, don't let anyone know. Stay humble, don't brag about it, and keep making more. Number 6. Greatest wealth transfers happen during crises. When the economy crashed in 2008, the unemployment rate skyrocketed because the companies couldn't keep paying the bills. Millions of people became jobless, homeless, and poor. However, some people aggressively began investing and became much wealthier after the crisis because the biggest transfers of wealth take place in crises. If you're ready to grasp the opportunity, you can become an overnight success. Remember, Jay Walker, whom we talked about at the beginning of the video, who joined the Billionaires Club in under a year, took advantage of the dot-com bubble. Although that his wealth wasn't sustainable, he still managed to keep hundreds of millions of dollars. Another example is Mark Cuban. He even once said, "You have to be lucky to become a billionaire, because if it wasn't for 1998 financial crisis, he wouldn't be a billionaire." I have an entire video about him, the link will be in the description. Instead of looking at the financial crisis and hoax created by the government or the 1% to rip off the poor, take advantage of it as they do. Understand how the system works, study the past crises to understand how and why they start, and be ready to be on the receivable side when the next one takes place. As you get older, your expenses will grow. Have you realized that every single year, one way or another, you spend more and more? $100 was a lot of money back when you were a teen. Now it barely covers your gas bill. And as you get older, your expenses will just keep increasing. That's the nature of our lives, especially if you start a family. Most people do not bother themselves about the future because they are making a decent amount of money today. But when they reach to a point where their expenses exceed their income, they start complaining that they don't make enough to invest. So if you do not make sure that your income is increasing every single year, soon you will trap yourself in a paycheck to paycheck cycle that will keep you poor for the rest of your life. And that's why you have to take the next rule extremely seriously. Wealth accumulates over time. As you can't grow a tree overnight, you can't grow wealth overnight. Remember, the earlier you invest, the better. With the power of compounding, you can become rich even with $100. No wonder why world's greatest investors started investing at the age of 11. What were you doing when you were 11? Here is a fun fact. You can make your grandchild a millionaire just by investing $1,160, which is equal to a price of a new smartphone. Because in 100 years, without a single additional investment, it will grow to over $1 million. You probably won't live by then, but I am sure that your grandchild will be thankful. Let's say he won't be greedy and will keep it for his grandson for another 100 years. It will grow to almost $1 billion. Of course, it's pointless to wait for so long, but the earlier you start, the faster you're going to reach to a position where you will be making enough to not worry about your bills again. It took Warren Buffett 55 years to make his first billion and just another 3 years to make his second billion. In fact, he made 98% of his fortune after his 55th birthday because of the power of compounding. Number 1. Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. When you look at someone who makes a lot of money, it's easy to fall into the perception that they are simply lucky. It's easy to point fingers and accuse rich people of being greedy. But the truth is, people don't suddenly make a lot of money except when they win the lottery, but rather work super hard their entire lives, and then 20 or 30 years later, their hard work starts to pay off. Elon Musk didn't just make $120 billion because he worked so hard this year. In fact, he probably didn't work as much as he usually does. For the last 17 years, Elon Musk worked day and night to make Tesla a successful company. He has invested over 80% of his own fortune that he has made from PayPal into Tesla, and in 2008, the company literally was on the verge of bankruptcy. He even reached out to the CEO of Daimler to convince him to buy Tesla because the company simply didn't have the funds to survive. But Daimler refused to even invest a dime in Tesla. Elon Musk spent his last dollars to save Tesla and was homeless for a while since he couldn't afford to pay the bills. Imagine making $180 million but still can't afford rent because you invested your entire fortune into your next startup. In 2018, Tesla was struggling financially again. Elon Musk reached out to Tim Cook to convince Apple to buy Tesla, but Tim Cook even refused to meet him. Elon Musk still somehow managed to save Tesla. Today, Tesla is worth over $500 billion, and Elon Musk is the second richest person in the world. So if you want to be in a better financial position 5, 10 or 15 years from now, you better start planning your tree now. Number 2. The most important thing to do if you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. Let's say you have borrowed money to buy a brand new BMW, but you don't use it much because you work from home and only need a ride once or twice a week, but you still have to make your monthly payments. The rational decision would be to sell that car and pay off your debts, since you don't need the car, but since you have already paid a portion of that car, you don't want your previous investments to go to waste, so you keep the car. It's like when you purchase a ticket to a movie but then find out that the movie is boring, you still keep watching it because you don't want your money to be wasted. And that's known as the sunk cost fallacy. We all make mistakes, especially financial mistakes, but don't let that lead you into making more financial mistakes. If you started a business and then realized that it was a mistake, stop wasting your money and time on a failing business. The money you have spent is already gone. Warren Buffett was a major investor in many airlines, but airline stocks crashed when the pandemic hit the world. Buffett lost billions of dollars, but he didn't insist on keeping his airline shares. Overnight, Warren Buffett sold his entire portfolio of airline shares and invested in different businesses that seemed to do better during the pandemic. Number 3. The worst investment you can have is cash. Everybody is talking about cash being king and all that sort of thing. Cash is going to become worthless over time, but good businesses are going to become worth more over time. If you know anything about money, then you probably heard about the concept of inflation. Paper money has no intrinsic value. It's merely created by the Federal Reserve to make it easy to measure the value of goods and services. Every year, the Fed is either prints more money or in some way pumps more money into the economy, which decreases the value of the existing cash in the economy. So having a lot of cash isn't real wealth. You're rich when you own businesses that constantly produce something and grow, or assets that in some way provide value, like a property that can be rented out. So don't strive to have more cash, but use that cash to buy businesses that can grow. Number 4. Speculation is most dangerous when it looks easiest. I remember back in 2017 when cryptocurrencies were rising like Falcon 9, everyone was jumping on board. No one wanted to miss this opportunity, but most of them had no idea what Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are. They thought that they could get in and make a fortune, but soon prices crashed and some people lost their entire life savings. Not to say that Bitcoin is useless or anything like that, but never invest in something you don't understand. In fact, risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Oh yeah, that's also Warren Buffett's quote. There are literally millions of ways to make money, but if you don't know enough about it, then you're gambling. Can you get lucky? Of course. But what are the chances that you can get lucky? Go and ask people who buy lottery tickets. Not much. So don't speculate. Number 5. If you buy things you don't need, soon you will have to sell things you need. The biggest financial mistake most people make is buying things they don't need, especially when they can hardly afford them. Life isn't a straight line. Sometimes you will make a lot of money, other times business will be down. So if you don't have a cash cushion, you will have to sell things you really need to pay the bills. At the end of the day, all that you need is a roof over your head, food on the table, and some wheels to get around, even if they are not your wheels. So always limit your expenses that you don't really need and focus on using your financial resources to build an extra source of income. How many times you have heard stories of people who inherited millions of dollars or even billions but ended up broke because they bought too many things they don't need? Even athletes like Mike Tyson, who made over $300 million over his career but had to file for bankruptcy once he retired. Number 6. Don't get caught up with what other people are doing. Have you ever heard of someone who did the exact same thing that others did and made a fortune? Probably not. That's why don't follow the crowd. It doesn't matter what everyone else does. Most people are going to settle for the average. In fact, if most people are doing it, then you should stay away from it. Great opportunities come when no one is paying attention. Being a contrarian isn't the key, but being a crowd follower isn't either. You need to detach yourself emotionally. Especially when it comes to investing. Whenever everyone is on board and start investing in a certain company, stay away from it because chances you will end up losing your money are way higher than you would make something, and vice versa, of course. Number 7. You don't have to do extraordinary things to get extraordinary results. Most people think that you have to do something extraordinary to make a lot of money. That's one way to do it. But making a lot of money is usually about small daily choices such as setting aside $5 a day and investing it in an index fund. You might not become the next Elon Musk or won't be able to build rockets that will make humanity multi-planetary and in the process become the world's richest person. But with small right decisions, you can achieve extraordinary results. So don't aim for immediate great results. The only immediate results you can aim for are 4 free stocks from Webull if you sign up and deposit $100 and start investing. How many years do you need to become a billionaire? Some people did it in 10 years while others in 50. It highly depends on the person and the circumstances. But one person outperformed everyone else. When Facebook was still an idea, Eduardo Saverin decided to invest in it $15,000. He stayed in Facebook for less than a year since he had a terrible relationship with Mark Zuckerberg. But that little investment and a year in Facebook turned him into a billionaire. His net worth today is over $11 billion. But not everyone gets such an opportunity. Quite often people have to build their wealth from scratch, step by step. However, one of the ways you can reach your financial goals faster is by investing. But the problem is that investing isn't easy. It's complicated, competitive, and cruel. And if you don't know the rules, you will probably just lose all of your money that you worked so hard to earn. So if you want to be one of the few people who actually makes money by investing, master the rules first. Number 1. Hope is not a strategy. There are 3 types of companies you should invest in. 1. It's a stable company. It has a great product, excellent leadership, and a good financial statements. So the company would probably keep growing on your investment if you decide to invest in this company. Secondly, it's a great company, but the stock price is undervalued, regardless of the reason. Maybe it received some negative press recently due to some minor issues, but the stock will definitely rise back to its true value. Thirdly, the company isn't making money now. Let's say it's a startup, but it has great potential. It might be a brand new industry, or they are developing breakthrough technology, and in the long run, they could be making huge profits. But to invest in such a company, you need to have a deep understanding of that industry and the business overall. You can't simply choose a company based on how cool its name sounds and hope that it will grow. Can you get lucky? Maybe. But that hope is not a strategy. So invest only in companies you understand. Secondly, time is more valuable than money. The problem with investing is that if you want to earn a reasonable amount, you have to invest quite some of money. Your $1,000 will earn you $80 at best annually, assuming an 8% rate of return. But if you invest $1 million, with the same rate of return, you would be making $80,000, which can provide you with a good quality of living. But earning that $1 million is the problematic part. You can't save all of your paycheck. You have to put food on the table and keep a roof over your head. And that's where the magic of compound interest comes into the picture. Even with as little as a few $1,000s, you can reach to millions if you take advantage out of it. Let's say you just graduated from high school and you have saved $2,000 from the pocket money you've been given in the last few years. That's a lot of money, of course, but not that much. You decide to invest it. You enroll in college and you get a part-time job. But you decide to live frugally and invest another $200 every month by saving up a bit on unnecessary expenses such as Starbucks coffees. At first glance, it seems like you can't save that much, and you're right. Even if you increase your savings with the rate of inflation, you will save around $180,000 over the course of 40 years. But because you've been investing it and reinvesting the interest and not merely saving it, it turns to $1.6 million. In fact, in the first 20 years, you won't cross $200,000. But in the last 20 years, you will earn $1.4 million. Why? Because of time. Of course, no one wants to wait 40 years before they can turn millionaires. But the message is clear. The earlier you start, the bigger the advantage you would have. Thirdly, buy when there is blood in the streets. Baron Rothschild, an 18th century British nobleman and member of the Rothschild banking family, once said, "The time to buy is when there is blood in the streets." This rule does not only apply to the stock market, but to any kind of investment, because humans are too emotional and are driven by their feelings. Instead of making rational decisions that are based on data and facts, most people would go with their guts. For instance, a bank would go bankrupt. All the people who kept their savings in that bank would lose their savings. Other people would see that and would rush to their banks to withdraw all of their savings, being afraid that their bank might go bankrupt as well. But because everyone has withdrawn their savings, the bank goes bankrupt. And that will push other people to do the same, slowly bankrupting every bank in the country and crushing the entire economy along the way. The panic destroyed the entire economy, but that's just in theory. In practice, well-established companies or banks survive such panics, but lose a lot of their value. In times like ours, the uncertainty has created a panic in the market, which led a lot of investors to sell their investments and scared off other investors from buying, which resulted in a significant crash in the market. However, once the panic fades away, businesses will get back to normal, and all of these companies will gain back their value. That's why when there is chaos or panic in the streets, that's the best time to invest, since a lot of great companies would be undervalued. Next, don't let greed destroy you. In 2003, Warren Buffett invested $488 million in PetroChina at around $37 billion valuation. At that time, it didn't seem like a good investment. A couple of years later, oil prices have soared and China's economy wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. And with a series of good fundamental earning reports, PetroChina's stock jumped significantly to the point where PetroChina crossed $1 trillion valuation. Buffett could have made $13 billion out of this deal, but as the company reached a valuation of around $300 billion, Buffett sold his entire stake and made only $3.5 billion. The lesson is, don't be too greedy, because your greed can end up losing you much more money than you could possibly earn. He could have waited longer, but how could he possibly know when it will crash? PetroChina is now trading at around $100 billion valuation. Number 5. Diversification is nonsense. How many stocks should you own on average? What do you think? Some people say 10, other experts suggest 20 to 30 in order to diversify your portfolio enough. But here's the question. Let's say you have a great company in front of you. It has great products, its financial statements are strong, the company has an excellent management and leadership. The question is, why would you invest in any other company if you have the opportunity to invest in this company? And that's why diversification isn't really a great strategy. But you might say there aren't many such companies. Fair enough, you are right. That's why you should only invest in a few great companies. So how many stocks should you own? As fewer as possible. With each extra stock you buy, you have to spend extra time and resources to follow it, read its financial statements, and make financial analysis. Of course, you should not put all of your eggs in one basket, but you also shouldn't invest in more and more companies just for the sake of diversification. There are some great companies out there in the market that have been consistently doing great, such as Coca-Cola, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway. Because they are such a great companies, they will definitely survive any crisis and would continue to grow. Each of these companies have at least doubled its stock price since the last recession. Number 6. Dividends matter. When it comes to making a profit out of the stock market, what people mostly look at is the stock price. The strategy is simple: buy low and sell high. That's a good strategy, but stocks don't just go up and down, they provide a stake in the company, which means every time the company makes a profit, it has to send you your share of that profit. That's known as a dividend. A stock by itself isn't really that helpful. Yes, of course, if the stock price keeps rising, you will get wealthier. But you're only getting wealthier on paper. You can't materialize that wealth unless you sell that particular stock at a higher price. It's like buying a piece of real estate and then waiting for its market value to increase instead of renting it to profit from it every month. And then use that profit to buy more real estate maybe, or these dividends to buy even more stocks and get wealthier. Passive income is great. Of course, sometimes it's better if the company does not pay dividends, especially if it is in its early stages or if the company has the potential to reinvest that profit to grow much faster. Next, the stock market isn't your only option. When you hear the word investing, the first thing that comes into mind is the stock market or the real estate or government bonds. They're all great investment tools, but they might not always be a perfect choice for you. Remember, investing comes in different shapes and sizes. Sometimes the best investment specifically for you might be that business you have been thinking about for some time. Or maybe if you have plenty of extra time after your job and you have a passion for graphic design, investing in a Photoshop course might earn you much more than if you have invested that cash in the stock market. Investing doesn't always have to result in immediate materialistic gains. Maybe investing in a self-help book or a finance book will have a much bigger impact on your life in the long run than any other kind of investment. The point is, think outside the box. The opportunity might be right under your nose. And lastly, patience is everything. Finally, after a few months of saving, you've earned enough to invest. But you can't find any good deals in the market. What do? Wait. Of course, sometimes the opportunity strikes and you have to be quick enough to take advantage out of it. But quite often, there are traps that will simply drain your money. Don't rush. Carefully analyze the market and read one more article and invest when you're confident enough. That also applies to selling. If the market is down, don't be a fool to rush to sell all of your stocks. Maybe that's temporarily. The stock price will rise back. Don't be driven by your emotions. Learn to be patient. When you think about the stock market, the first thing that comes into your mind is this complicated world of the stock market, where no one seems to clearly understand what's going on. Because whenever things seem to go in the right direction, we end up facing a financial disaster. But unlike everyone else, one gentleman seems to know a secret formula when it comes to investing. Over his life, he continuously made successful investments over and over, and he is considered by many as the greatest investor of all time. He was so good that just by the age of 16, he already made $53,000. It still surprises me how Harvard didn't accept him. They probably regret it now. But that doesn't matter, because what we are going to focus in this video is how does Warren Buffett invests. A lot of people out there are eager to invest, but they don't know which companies to pick. So I thought, how about we take a look at the step-by-step process of how Warren Buffett picks a stock. He doesn't randomly invest. If you take a look at all the companies he has ever invested, you will realize that they are all interconnected. They have similar traits, similar values, and function in a very similar way. So let's find out, why does he prefers one stock over the other? Why does he picks this company over all the other options that he has? Warren Buffett is a long-term investor. He couldn't care less about how the company is going to perform today or tomorrow or even the next year. His primary concern is where the company is going to be 10 years from now or 15 years from now. But it's quite difficult to predict that if the company is too complicated. So he just looks for businesses that are simple and direct. This is the product, these are the customers, and this is why they are going to buy it. You don't have to be a genius to understand their business model. It's so simple that even a little kid would understand it. That's what Buffett loves, because the simpler the business model, the easier it gets to predict if their products are going to stay relevant 10 years from now. The second trait is, will the customer buy the product again and why? And this is remarkably important, because if you have the kind of a product that would sell once and then the client wouldn't need it anymore, then your market is limited. A great product is when your client would keep coming back for it every day or every week or even every year. Like bread, for example. If you're selling bread, you would expect the exact same products to come back tomorrow or next week over and over. And 10 years from now, people would still need bread. You might sell it in a different way or in a different form. You might improve its quality, package it fancier, but it's still the same product that people would keep coming back for. And that's what makes iPhone, by the way, one of the greatest products in history, because people kept coming back for it every September, even though it's not a necessity like bread. In fact, that's the reason behind the rise of the subscription business model, where businesses would charge you a little fee every month, like Netflix, for example, or every year like Amazon Prime, because it's a more sustainable strategy. The third component is the brand. People have the tendency to buy from the companies that they feel connected to or familiar. Whose sneakers would you buy? The first ones are from a brand that you have never heard of, and the second ones are good old Nikes. Even if they look fancier, you probably would hesitate to buy them because you simply haven't heard of that brand before. On the other side, you easily recognize Nike. It's a well-established brand. You easily recognize it, and they are known for making great sneakers. You might already be wearing a pair of Nike shoes. So what would you choose? And that's why Buffett pays so much attention to how powerful is the brand name before throwing his billions into that company. He understands how big of an influence it's going to have on the consumer's decision. In fact, if the brand is strong enough, consumers would buy almost anything that company produces. Warren Buffett is one of the major investors in Coca-Cola. In fact, he started investing in Coca-Cola back in 1988, and his investments since then have grown by over 16 times. And Coca-Cola is one of the few companies that have all the traits Buffett look at before considering investing. First of all, their business model. It's so simple that anyone would understand it. What do they sell? A drink. Who are their potential customers? Pretty much anyone who is thirsty, the entire world. Is it one-time product, or their clients would keep coming back for it every now and then?
This is the hole you dug in the backyard to hide your savings. This is Sawa, an online investment platform that helps put your money to work. Over time,
of course they would keep coming back. Some people drink 4 or 5 cans a day. It's a product that satisfies one of our most important needs. And once you get used to it, it's addictive. It's not easy to quit even if it's unhealthy. However, it has a lot of competitors. I mean, the shops are filled with endless numbers of soft drinks. There's so many of them that it seems like there is a new soft drink company emerges every other day. But the Coca-Cola brand is so powerful that out of 20 or 30 options, you easily recognize it. Most people would probably pick Coca-Cola without even thinking. And if it's out of stock, you probably would go to another store instead of choosing one of the 30 other options they have. Think about it. 1.8 billion cans are sold every single day. If the company will earn a single penny out of every can that they sell, that's $18 million a day, or $6.5 billion a year. But with such a powerful brand that they have, they can charge more than a penny for every can. That's why Buffett bought $1 billion of Coca-Cola shares back in 1988. It's his biggest investment. He was confident that 10, 20, or even 30 years from now, this company will keep growing, regardless if the economy will crash or another financial crisis is on the horizon. Let's take a look at another example. In 1989, Warren invested $600 million in Gillette, the company that makes razors. If you give it a closer look, Gillette holds the exact same position in its industry as Coca-Cola does in beverages. Regardless of what happens, people will still shave. And their products are just filling that basic human need. You don't need to have an IQ of 150 to understand why people are buying razors, or why they will keep coming back for that product even 10 years from now. But of course, Gillette isn't the only company in its industry. It has a ton of competitors. However, if you ask people to name a razor brand other than Gillette, 90% of people won't be able to do that. Do you see how it perfectly matches with all the requirements that Buffett has? It's a simple product that people would keep buying, and it has a strong brand name. The exact same story repeats with See's Candy. In fact, it has been one of his best investments ever. Even though that the company wasn't as profitable as Buffett wanted, it had an extremely strong brand. That made all the difference. Buffett realized that people don't usually buy candies for themselves, but as gifts to others. So people would keep coming back for Christmas, Valentine's Day, birthdays, or whatever. So he acquired the company in 1972 for $25 million, when it was making roughly $4 million in profit. Since then, company's profit increased 20 times over the next 35 years. In 2007, their profit exceeded $82 million. Buffett always stayed out of the tech world, but recently he massively invested in Apple. We live in an age where the technology has become more of a need than a want, and Apple keeps creating the type of tech that people keep coming back for. Apple has an army of fans who update their iPhones every single year. Of course, Apple isn't the only tech company out there, but it definitely has the strongest brand name. Of course, you still have to look at the financial statements of the company, consider all the other factors that will influence the future of the company, and each company has some unique circumstances. But overall, these are the three most important factors to consider when you're thinking where to throw your money in. 7 money truths I wish I knew sooner. Like most of you, I grew up knowing nothing about money, except that I can use it to buy what I want. The only problem was that I didn't know how to make that money. We grew up struggling financially, so my parents always had this idea that I should do my best to get a high-paying job in a respectable company to lift myself out of desperate financial position. In fact, I didn't even know what the stock market was until I was like 17 years old. And it took me some time to figure out how on earth does it works. And I learned it the hard way, where I lost money, but eventually I figured everything out. But there are certain things that I wish I just knew earlier. I wish someone would have told me all of that when I was a little teenager. I would have done a lot of things differently and saved a ton of money and time that I have wasted to figure them out. So what I'm going to do in this video is share them with you and save you a ton of money and, most importantly, time. Knowing these things will help you to get financially free much sooner than you would otherwise. Number 1. Leverage turns good deals into great deals. If someone told me back when I was just 19 years old that you could use debt to make a fortune, I would say you are an idiot. I would never ever go into debt because I grew up having such a negative opinion about debt, leave alone the interest you get charged on top of it. But it turns out that that isn't as bad as I imagined. It's actually good in some cases. Take this case for example. Let's say you want to buy a house and you have $1 million in cash. If you have a really strong credit score, you can get a 3% mortgage rate. Of course, you can spend that $1 million to buy a house, or you can get a mortgage and invest that $1 million elsewhere, like the stock market for example, and get, let's say, 7% annually. In the second scenario where you are using debt, you aren't just getting the house, but letting that money grow by additional 4%. This is of course a super simple example because we didn't take into account the down payments and the market fluctuations, but that's the idea in general. Every successful real estate investor has used debt in some form to be where they are today. Often, they use their first mortgage as a collateral to get the second one and rent it out and so on. Instead of saving to buy each property, you can use debt to save yourself decades worth of time. Number 2. Tax loopholes are made to be used. No one likes paying taxes, but the tax code isn't just black and white, except the income tax where it gets higher as you make more money, up to 37%. But it's filled with loopholes where you could be making millions of dollars and pay absolutely no taxes because on paper you could be showing loss. Let's say you have a $300,000 mortgage with a mortgage rate of 3%. You can deduct your mortgage interest from your rental income, which means if you make $30,000 from that house, you can be deducting $9,000 from it. Now, instead of paying taxes on $30,000, out of a sudden, you only have to pay on $21,000. That's why it's even better to get a mortgage even if you can afford to buy the property. There is also something called depreciation. Almost everything we buy depreciates over time, and tax codes usually allow you to use depreciation as an expense, although you lost nothing and further lower your income on paper and minimize taxes. Companies use this strategy all the time. If you just pick the financial statements of any company, you will realize that they always have depreciation in their income statements. You can even avoid taxes when you sell that property if you end up buying another one in return. We can talk forever about the loopholes in the tax code, but that's the idea in general. The next one is, the more money you make, the easier it gets. When you barely make ends meet, it's difficult to imagine making millions, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you work overtime, you might somehow double your income. But the truth is, wealth doesn't really work like that. Earning your first $100,000 is much more harder than making your first $1 million. Because as you make more and more money, more and more opportunities will open in front of you. Saving enough to be able to get your first mortgage might take you a few years at least, but the second one gets a lot easier. So don't be discouraged if you can't see yourself making more. Focus first on saving your first $20, $50, or $100,000, or on getting your first property. Trust me, it gets way easier down the road. Planning the first 3 is the most difficult one. Number 4. A single opportunity can make you a fortune. The average return on an investment in the market is about 6 to 10%, and the only way to build a fortune is by investing long term. But there is another way, a faster way. There is literally a shortcut in building wealth, but it's not easy. In 2008, when the market crashed, home prices fell dramatically. They were sold at a fraction of their real value, and whoever was ready for that opportunity jumped in and purchased multiple properties at a fraction of their real price, and a few years later made a fortune when home prices rose back to their real value. During crises, cash is the king, and this pandemic is proof. In March, stock prices dropped by almost 50%, and whoever was ready ended up making millions. So if you want to be ready for the next crisis, you have to save, save, and save. Number 5. Don't explain your financial goals to anyone. One of the mistakes I made back when I was a little teenager is telling people my financial goals. People start arguing with you, telling you why is that not possible, why is that not a realistic goal, and so on. That can discourage some people. The truth is, you know yourself and your situation much better than others. Keep your goals, especially financial goals, within yourself. Of course, be rational with them. But the truth is, no one really cares. People sometimes feel jealous. Sometimes they want to discourage you in some way. So just keep working in silence and let your results talk. Number 6. Always use the 80-20 rule. There are a million ways to make money, and that's not an exaggeration. Some of them are going to work for you and others won't. What you have to do is that find that one thing that makes you maximum income and then focus all of your energy on making the best out of it. Don't jump from one thing to another. Don't try to do a lot of things at the same time, which is what I did back then, and I see a lot of people repeating the same mistake. Have you ever heard of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the outcomes come from 20% of the causes? It applies to money as well. 80% of your income comes from 20% of your work, so focus only on them. And finally, there are things that money can't buy. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you imagine that money can buy anything. That's not true. Anyone who makes a lot of money can tell you that. Money of course solves a lot of problems and makes life a lot easier, and you should strive to make a lot of money. But there are things that money can't buy, like friendship, just good time with friends, a dinner with family. While you're building your wealth, enjoy these little things along the way. Build great relationships, have fun. Money isn't gonna help you with that. Number 1. Keeping your money in a bank is a scam. Let me ask you a question. How much interest would you earn if you deposit your savings in a bank? At first glance, it seems like at least a few percent for it to make any sense, right? However, if you look at the numbers, that's far from that. The top banks such as the Citibank, for example, offer literally less than 0.5%. There are banks that offer a higher rate, but they are still less than 1%, especially since interest rates are at the bottom now. Think about it. Your money grows by 0.5% while inflation is 2.5%. The intrinsic value of your wealth is literally decreasing every single year. You're far better off spending that money today than keeping it in a bank. The purchasing power of your money in a few years is going to be far less than it's now. And when inflation is skyrocketing as it's now, for example, asset prices such as homes, stocks rise exponentially, as we have seen happening in the last year or so. A bank is a place to park your money and not to make money. Number 2. Every bank has the right to create money out of thin air. If I would tell you that banks do create money, you probably won't believe me, because the only bank that's allowed to create money is the Fed. It's the source of the dollar and the only institution that has the right to that printing machine. However, the banking system works in such a way that every bank in the country, or in fact the world, is allowed to create money to a certain degree based on how much people have deposited in that bank. Let's say you deposit $1,000 in a bank A. What do you think that bank is going to do with that money? There is no point in keeping it. They wouldn't even be able to pay you your miserable 0.5%. So the bank lends your money to someone else who wants to buy a car, for example, or a house, and collects interest, which often much higher than 0.5% that it pays you. An average credit card interest is 20%. That's literally dozens of times higher than what the bank pays you. The point is that the bank isn't going to tell you to whom it will lend your money. Whenever you check your account, the bank is going to show you that your money is still there in the bank. You can withdraw it whenever you want. So if your money is still there in the bank, where did the bank take the money to lend to someone else? That's known as fractional reserve banking. Banks are allowed to keep just 10% of the deposits and lend the rest. For every $1,000 you deposit in the bank creates another $900 and lends it to someone else, which brings the total amount to $1,900. The bank created $900 out of thin air. It's not as difficult as you might think, since they're just digits in the computer. Number 3. You can make money by borrowing money from banks and investing it elsewhere. In July 2012, Mark Zuckerberg financed his $6 million Palo Alto home that's 3 miles away from Facebook's headquarters with a 30-year mortgage. At that time, he was 28 years old and the world's 40th wealthiest person, worth an estimated $15.6 billion. The question is, why would you get into debt when you have billions of dollars and can easily afford it? If he wanted, he could easily buy a dozen $6 million homes in cash without batting an eye. So, why get a mortgage? It's free money. Sounds unreal, I understand. Who would give you free money when you're already a billionaire? I mean, why would anyone give anyone else free money unless it's charity? It all has to do with interest rates. Remember when we talked about banks giving such a low ROI that it doesn't worth keeping your money there since it doesn't even beat inflation? So you're losing money? Well, in this scenario, it's the other way around. The inflation rate in the US is 2.5 to 3%. So any money you can borrow is below inflation rate is considered free money. Zuckerberg's mortgage rate was just a little over 1%. If you do the math, the banks is the loser since the mortgage rate is below the inflation. You don't have to be the genius to do the math. For the sake of example, let's say you borrow $1 million at the rate of 1%. The average rate of return on a savings account is 2.4% before the pandemic, and now it's less than 1%. But let's just stick to 2.4%, meaning that if you deposit that $1 million in another bank, you end up making $24,000 a year. Well, you only have to make a monthly payments of $10,500 to the bank that lent you that money. Imagine if you do that with $100 million, or how about $1 billion? When you can borrow money for free, there is no point in tying up your own money when you can use that money for more profitable things. Of course, when we are talking about small amounts of money, this might not make sense because the difference isn't that big. However, when it comes to large sums, playing around with 1, 2, or 0.5% could potentially mean dozens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds. Number 4. The richer you are, the lower the rate you get. Remember that banks are not charity organizations, but are businesses like any other whose job is to maximize profit. They have shareholders to whom they are accountable, and if their business model isn't going to be profitable, they're not going to survive. That's why they're much more comfortable lending money to a rich guy than a poor guy. When you're a billionaire, for example, the banks can sleep peacefully because no one is worried that you might default on your loan. And in case if something happens, in case you can't make your monthly payments, you can easily sell part of your business to pay back your mortgage. That makes loaning money to you almost risk-free. In fact, that's how the banking system evolved over the centuries, where banks would only work with nobility, with people who had money and assets that constantly generate income such as land. Compare that to an average employee who could get sick or might not be able to work or just loses his job. If you're barely making ends meet, loaning money to you is extremely risky. I know that it's easy to criticize banks for that, but think about it. Would you feel comfortable loaning money to a friend who barely makes any money or a friend who has a business?
What this means for you is a guaranteed $5,700 by tomorrow morning. In fact, you can expect to see your first $250.
Probably the latter, no matter how harsh does it sounds. If you want to get a lower mortgage rate, a lower credit card rate, just better terms when borrowing money, you have to do better financially first. Banks also offer such a low mortgage rate to establish a strong relationship with rich people so that when they would need a bigger loan for their business, for example, they would come to them. It's a win-win situation. Technologies such as blockchain or cryptocurrencies are promising to change that and democratize banking, and they will probably to a certain extent. In fact, banking has been democratized to the point where everyone has access to financial services. Compare that to 100 years ago. Number 5. Credit cards are banks' nuclear weapons. 70% of Americans with credit card debt admit they can't pay it off this year. Think for a moment about what does that mean. Your credit card debt isn't like your mortgage. It isn't like 3.5% a year. It's probably like 20%. If you can't pay your credit card debt on time now, what makes you think that you can pay it in a few months later when that debt has grown much bigger? In other words, 70% of Americans are about to fall into the debt trap. Over half of those surveyed, 56% say that they've had a credit card debt for at least a year, and most will continue to carry it for years to come. Almost 20% estimate it will take them more than 3 years to pay off their debt, while roughly 8% say that they don't know when they will be able to pay it down. And that's how banks usually make fortunes, because most people spend without thinking about how they will pay it back. They are used to a certain standard of living and they are ready to keep it even if they can't afford it. That's why banks keep calling you to sell you a brand new credit card. Don't get me wrong, using credit cards responsibly is great to build your credit score, but if you're not financially responsible, then you shouldn't get yourself into that debt trap. The 20s are probably the best years of your life. This is when you are introduced to the real world after being a terrible teenager for years. In the next few years, you're going to figure out what are you going to do with the rest of your life. Most people end up ruining their 20s by making horrible financial decisions that will bear on their shoulders for many decades to come, such as student debts, although most people take it when they are still teenagers. Looking back at my life, I knew very little about money because I grew up in a family where my parents didn't care about financial literacy, so I grew up knowing very little about money. All they cared about were my grades at school. Guess what happened? I made every financial mistake you can think about. I was naive and I thought that I know everything there is to know about money. You can't blame me because no one taught me anything about money. I had to figure out everything on my own. There wasn't even such a channel like Proactive Thinker that would teach me everything I need to know about money. I was on my own. But if I would go back in time, there are a few things I wish I knew. If I knew these things, I would take different financial decisions, and I guess I would have become financially free much sooner. So, if you're in your 20s or even a teenager, I think what I'm about to share with you is going to be extremely helpful, because it's not like when you hit a certain age, you suddenly get better at managing money. Aren't there 40 or 50-year-olds who are still doing terrible financially? That's why pay attention, because what you're about to learn might be the most important things you will ever learn. So give this video a thumbs up and let's get right into it. Number 1. Don't try to do everything on your own. Back then, I used to think that I can do everything on my own. Why do I need a partner when I can outwork everyone? But the reality is, having a partner in any project is going to save you a lot of time and mistakes, because you always need a co-founder to balance you out. It doesn't matter whether it's a startup, a small business, a YouTube channel. If you can get a partner who is equally interested in that project, work together. Yes, of course, you will have to share the profits or the business, but it's better to share a huge pie rather than having a small little pie by yourself. It doesn't matter how smart or talented are you. You are not perfect, especially in your 20s. You're guaranteed to make a lot of mistakes. So you always need someone besides you to tell you that you're wrong, and vice versa, of course. Every project that I have started with a co-founder has always grown much faster than any project that I did on my own. So don't be selfish and learn how to work with teams. Remember, you're still a kid and your knowledge is very limited. So always be open to take a look at the opposite side. Of course, you could be right, but you also could be wrong equally. And being open-minded is going to save you a lot of money and time. Number 2, don't be naive. If there is one thing I would tell my younger self is, don't be naive. When you're a 20-year-old college kid, you think that you have figured everything out. You make all these plans only to grow up a little bit and realize how naive you were and that the world works in a completely different way. Or just because you work hard, you think you deserve more. But when you grow up, you realize that no one cares about your hard work. What matters at the end of the day is the final outcome. No one really cares about your grades. Once you're out there in the workplace, what matters is how much you can help the company to grow. Your grades are the least important things. I remember how my friends used to take loans just to buy a cool car because that will get them the girls. I'm not sure how naive you have to be to think like that. Maybe there is a small number of girls who would hang out with you just because you have a cool car. And if they do, you shouldn't hang out with such girls, because all they want at the end of the day is to drain the last dollar out of you. All these naive perceptions push you to take horrible financial decisions and unnecessary financial responsibilities, which brings me to point number 3. Don't take a financial responsibility you can't afford. I have many friends who fell in love in their 20s, got married, and already have kids that go to school. Whenever I talk to them, I really feel old because I don't have kids, neither am I married. But the problem was that they were not ready for that financially. So right now, they can't save money even though they are no longer in their 20s. But because they have kids and a family to support, every penny they earn goes directly to their day-to-day expenses, and they can't suddenly get rid of their kids and wives. And because they have so many responsibilities, the idea of losing that job freaks them out, because they might be able to cut some of their expenses, but they can't sacrifice their family for that. So they stick to that job with their lives and are ready to do everything to keep it. They literally push themselves into a corner, and now they will probably never leave it for the rest of their lives. They're forever trapped in that paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. When you have a job, your career moves slowly. You don't get promoted every day. You don't even get promoted every year. So whenever you get that little promotion, you slightly improve the quality of your life, which means you start spending more. And if God forbid you overuse that credit card, you will spend your entire life just trying to pay your bills. So think twice before you commit to any serious financial responsibility. Number 4, stay away from money wasters. One of the worst things you can ever do is develop a bad and expensive habit, especially when you are a 20-year-old kid who isn't making a lot of money. First of all the extra money you're supposed to save and invest, you're going to waste it on another pack of cigars, alcohol, or gambling, or whatever is your bad expensive habit is. Number 2, the opportunity cost of that habit is far bigger than you can possibly imagine. An opportunity cost simply means how much that money would worth if you have invested it otherwise. A pack of cigarettes costs around $7. And let's say you are a regular smoker and you smoke a pack a day. That's $210 a month. Let's say you start smoking when you turn 18. If you instead invested that money in the S&P 500, for example, assuming you will make a 10% rate of return, your portfolio will turn into $1.2 million by the time you hit 58. The question is, what's better? Damaged lungs that you have to spend a fortune to recover when you're in your late 50s? In fact, you will probably never recover them entirely, no matter how much money you spent, or $1.2 million of assets. I think the latter is far better option. Of course, if you're a billionaire, you shouldn't care, but you also shouldn't even watch this video. Number 5. You do not need a lot of money to have fun. We always think that we need to spend money to have fun. While there is some truth to it, but that's not the entire story. Renting a yacht with friends, throwing a huge party, or traveling the world while staying in expensive hotels is fun. But there are also plenty of ways to have fun without wasting a fortune, like going for a drink with friends, traveling the world and staying in a cheap Airbnb flat, or playing basketball or soccer with friends. It could be whatever. Some of the best ways I've ever had fun were the times I spent the least amount of money. In fact, it's not about the money, but rather about the experience you get, how you feel when you're doing what you're doing. Especially if you have really good friends, then you can have all the fun in the world and barely waste any money. Remember the opportunity cost we talked about? Even if you can afford to spend a lot of money to have fun, don't. You should rather invest that money. Remember that as you get older, your expenses will rise, so having more money later in your life is a wiser option. I don't mean that you shouldn't spend anything, there is no point in just keeping money in your bank account, but you also have to be responsible with that money. There are far more points I wanted to include in this video, but I will limit them to 5. If you guys find this video interesting and helpful, I will definitely make part 2. Anyways, if you have enjoyed this video, you will most definitely enjoy this